The idea of Trump putting out news that he was going to be arrested on Tuesday and diving into this Alvin Bragg story, Buck, I just, for people who listen, I've been predicting that Trump was going to be indicted for a long time, and I thought that it probably would come from one of these states, right? New York or Georgia, because I think that's more difficult now in the wake of the Biden classified document scandal. But I just don't think people are talking enough about how outrageously without precedent this move is, not only for Trump, but basically, Buck, what I believe it would put in motion is almost every politician would end up getting charged with felonies because there are going to be Republican firebacks if Democrats do this, and it will become standard that there will be perp walks for politicians of both parties for decades to come.
Democrats have tried similar shenanigans in terms of the weaponization of the law against politicians in the past, but never have you seen it against not only a former president, but a current presidential contender, right? That's really the part of this that I think, if you're looking at the destabilizing effects that it could have. I mentioned before, I think it was Clay, while you were here before you went away, the Ted Stevens prosecution, for example, Republican Senator Ted Stevens. They hid evidence. I mean, that as straightforward as it was. And as I said, federal prosecutors ended up losing their careers, and one even took his own life over that debacle. And then there was the Governor Bob McDonnell of Virginia honest services fraud prosecution. If you recall, they wanted to put McDonnell, the former governor of Virginia, away for something like 11 years. I think that was the initial push. And his wife, who wasn't even official for 2 years, because they had deprived, this was under a federal prosecution, they had deprived the people of Virginia of the honest services of their, I mean, it was the Supreme Court ended up saying, you could literally prosecute somebody for, and this comes out of Justice Scalia, for getting a good table at a restaurant as a politician, because, hey, can't count on them to be honest in the restaurant industry anymore. They got a good table. He's like, it's completely insane. The Donald Trump situation, though, right now, first of all, as we know it hasn't happened. So I know I've been talking to everybody about this, obviously, all day yesterday. So I wanted to make sure everyone got your sort of 30,000-foot take. Does this, first of all, and in your mind, does it 100% happen? Is there a chance that Bragg backs off at this point? And then the second aspect of this that I wanted to hear your take on is the political reality of this. Does this mean that Donald Trump is the de facto Republican nominee? And is that what Democrats want? Break those two down for me.
Yeah, those are good questions. And so the first one is, it depends on what Alvin Bragg's aim is. He overwhelmingly wins by bringing charges against Donald Trump no matter what happens, because then he goes into the history books as the prosecutor who had the stones to take on Donald Trump. And whether Trump is convicted or whether the case ends up in being legitimately able to be brought or not, Alvin Bragg becomes a made man in Democrat circles. He could decide to run for the Senate. He could decide to run for governor. I don't see any political fallout for Alvin Bragg at all. So in terms of whether or not it happens, I think honestly, and it's crazy to have to think about this, I think it has to go to the essence of whether Alvin Bragg wants to effectively start nuclear war in our politics. Because if he does this, then this is going to become commonplace, I believe, in the decades ahead. Almost, Buck, in the same way that impeachment has kind of become standard. You kind of roll your eyes when somebody gets impeached now. For hundreds of years, it was rare. And now you sort of feel like every president, if they have a party that is of the opposite party, is going to impeach for some reason or other. It feels like that's kind of standardized. It was so cheapened in the Trump era. I feel like these kind of charges do that. Now, if the Democrats have anything on Alvin Bragg, I don't think that they want this to be their opening salvo on Trump, because it's a weak misdemeanor that's trying to be elevated to a felony. It also steps on whatever might happen in Georgia, and more importantly, it steps on the Department of Justice decision. So I think Democrats nationally don't want it to happen. I think for Alvin Bragg, it makes all the sense in the world to happen.
So can I put out this idea to you, which came to us? We played it on the show yesterday when you were in flight. Andy McCarthy had said over the weekend, and I believe Andy is joining us in the third hour, so we'll get some of his real-time live insight onto where all this is going. It's also a strange thing to spend a few days. There's a banking crisis that is still unfolding,
yeah,
by the way.
Slow moving, right? Yeah.
We are on the precipice of a massive recession, according to a lot of very smart people, and Donald Trump getting arrested for effectively a glorified misdemeanor that's past the statute of limitations, that's a campaign finance issue, was the biggest story. But anyway, it's crazy. Andy McCarthy was saying that could this be the breaking of the breaking of the wall, the crossing of the Rubicon, pick your metaphor, whereby once he's indicted by one legal authority that is weaponized, then Georgia, then maybe January 6th on the federal side, then it sort of creates a breaking of the dam effect. That's a better metaphor. What do you think about that?
I still don't think they're going to bring federal charges on him, because I think Merrick Garland is going to get up eventually and wag his finger because Biden stepped on the classified document mess. I think it's going to be very hard to bring federal charges because that feels so intensely political. And also because I believe then that blows back when you have a national constituency. Remember, what does Alvin Bragg want?
But what about
if he wants to be elected governor, if he wants to be elected senator, the best thing he could do for his own career is to charge Trump.
I think we can agree, you, me, and everybody listening. I don't really think there's any doubt that the downside for Alvin Bragg is basically zero. If he indicts, there is nothing but upside for him over the long term. The downside for the nation, the rule of law, our sense of politics in this country and what is fair play, that is all at risk. But for him, he becomes a hero, a guaranteed multimillionaire, and a gubernatorial, and Clay, maybe even beyond that, political Democrat player. That's what happens for him if he does it. So then you got to get to why wouldn't he do it?
And that's why I also think charges in Georgia are going to end up happening. That's what I've been saying for a while. Because, again, the benefit to the prosecutor of bringing these charges is so much more substantial politically, and these are political animals, than any of the downside. Usually bet on big upside, no downside.
And that then goes to Andy's point. And again, he'll be with us in the third hour of the program to talk about this himself. But first one through the breach creates the opening for Georgia. Your point about the decision-making process in that Georgia election interference case, if you're the second guy to bring charges against the president, you get to be a hero, and you have, to the Democrats, obviously, not to the country, but also, you're just kind of following suit. I think the first one to pull to pull the lever on this one is making the harder call, and then it just becomes easy for others to follow and say, yeah, it's a pile-on.
No doubt. And then it also becomes easier for the media to not have to focus on the particulars of one case and just say, this is evidence of Trump being just a criminal vigilante and all of the behavior being so unacceptable.
When we come back, I'm going to make you answer the question, though. Does this mean if they bring the charge, does it mean Donald Trump is more likely or almost certain to be the nominee?
I think charges are inevitable. Almost everybody who's looked at it except Alvin Bragg has decided that it doesn't pass the smell test, particularly because it rests so heavily on Cohen. And at the end of the day, I think everybody understands that these particular charges, as contrived as they may be, they wouldn't be brought against any American not named Donald Trump. And that's the part that, as a former prosecutor and a lawyer, troubles me the most, because just because you have a bad man, a potentially bad man, or somebody who's not well liked, you shouldn't distort the Justice Department or the justice decisions in order to get him.
So that was former Trump White House lawyer Ty Cobb, which, by the way, that is a famous baseball player, right, Clay? Right? I know enough to know that. But that's the lawyer Ty Cobb, not the ball player. And he's saying what's obvious, which is they wouldn't bring this against anybody who wasn't Trump. The politics of this are as open and brazen as anybody could imagine. The decision hasn't been made, so we don't want to belabor. We got a banking crisis we still got to talk about with Clay. The Ron DeSantis-Trump aspect of this is very interesting, and we got a whole bunch of topics to hit that we're going to later on today in the show and for the rest of the show. But Clay, the dynamics of this for just the Republican primary are interesting, and for the general election. Let's you just take the ball here. If Trump is indicted next week, does this dramatically assist him in the primary and the general election, or is it very much conditional on what comes next?
I think it massively helps him. I don't think there's any doubt at all, because in the same way that when the Mar-a-Lago raid occurred, a lot of people lined up and said, hey, Trump, this is unacceptable, the precedent that we are setting. I think that many people out there will rally around Trump if he's indicted over this issue. And the same thing if it is indicted in Georgia. And then I don't think the Department of Justice is going to do this. But if they then jumped on as well, it's an unprecedented attack against the leading political contender. And for everybody out there who was a Democrat that's been arguing democracy dies in darkness and all of this crap, this is the biggest attack on our democracy that would have occurred in any of our lives for the political party opposing Donald Trump to try to take him out. So remember, though, I think that they also may be involved in this calculus, Buck, because I think the Democrats know that if they indict Trump, they actually make it more likely that he's going to be the nominee. And remember, if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris got to select their opponent right now, they would pick Trump. That's why Democrats are running Joe Biden. We know Biden is in. I think this is designed to actually in some way strengthen Trump and make him more likely to be the nominee.
I got to say, I'm curious if any of our extended family here of radio listeners think that statement, because I do think that there's an assumption right now, it's very widespread, even among Trump supporters in the primary, that the Democrats would rather face off against Trump. I'm curious if anyone disagrees with that. You can email us at Clay and Buck, VIP, clayandbuck.com, but also call us. I'm very curious to hear an argument about that, right? That no, they don't want Trump, because that to me is an important part of this calculation. If your opponents, if the enemy wants you to make a move, are they just mistaken, or is that something that we should be taking into account?
I also wonder, and this is a big picture question, how does DeSantis, we're going to talk about this some in the next hour in a little bit, but how does DeSantis respond to this? Because I think he's been caught a little bit not on his front foot, right? I don't think that he's thrown and responded to this in a way that I would have anticipated him. I think that it's actually worked in Trump's favor also in his battle against DeSantis.